The scariest secrets are never hidden behind locked doors. They sleep beside you, hold your hand, and tell you goodnight. The rain tapped softly against my apartment window as I curled up on the couch with a mug of chamomile tea that had already gone cold. Outside, Manhattan shimmered beneath thousands of lights, every street glowing like a river of gold beneath the storm. It was almost 11 o'clock, and Adrian was late again. Not unusual, not even surprising anymore. For the past 8 months, I had learned that loving Adrian Moretti meant accepting unanswered questions, business trips that appeared without warning, phone calls he always took in private, entire weekends when he disappeared with nothing more than a quick text promising he would explain later. The strange thing was that none of it ever felt suspicious. At least not then. Adrian had a way of making everything feel normal. He remembered how I liked my coffee. He showed up with soup when I caught the flu. He listened when I complained about difficult students at the middle school where I taught art. He never interrupted, never judged, never acted like my problems were too small to matter. When he finally arrived that night, water glistening on the shoulders of his charcoal coat, the tension in my chest immediately eased. "Sorry," he said with a tired smile. "Long day." "You always say that." "Because it's usually true." He kissed my forehead and set a small paper bag on the kitchen counter. My favorite blueberry muffins from the bakery 3 blocks away. The one that closed at 9. Somehow he always managed to get them anyway. "You know," I said, narrowing my eyes playfully, "one day I'm going to figure out how you do that." Adrian laughed softly. "Some mysteries are better left unsolved." At the time, it sounded charming. Looking back, I realize it was probably the most honest thing he ever said to me. We spent the next hour talking about nothing important. My students. A gallery opening downtown. The neighbor who kept playing jazz music at 2 in the morning. Ordinary things. Beautifully ordinary things. That was what I loved most about him. Around Adrian, life felt safe. Predictable. Steady. The storm outside intensified, rain streaking across the glass in silver lines. Adrian stood near the window, one hand in his pocket, staring down at the city below. For a moment, something changed in his expression. His eyes became distant, calculating, like he was watching a world I couldn't see. Then his phone vibrated. Once, he glanced at the screen. Every trace of warmth disappeared from his face. Not anger, not fear, just a cold focus that appeared so quickly it made my stomach tighten. "Everything okay?" I asked. He slipped the phone back into his pocket almost immediately. "Just work." "At 11 o'clock?" "Unfortunately." I nodded, letting it go. I always let it go. 15 minutes later he left, promising to call me in the morning. I watched from my window as he crossed the street below. Then something happened that I still remember with perfect clarity. A man walking toward him suddenly froze. Completely froze. His face lost color. His eyes widened. For a second, he looked terrified. Then he lowered his head and hurried away without saying a word. Adrian never even looked at him. He simply continued walking through the rain as though nothing had happened. I stood there staring long after he disappeared around the corner. And for the first time in 8 months, a single uncomfortable question entered my mind. Who exactly was Adrian Moretti? I did not sleep much that night. The image of that stranger's face kept replaying in my mind every time I closed my eyes. The fear, the way he had instantly looked away from Adrian, the way he had practically rushed off the sidewalk as if staying another second would have been a mistake. By morning, I had convinced myself I was overthinking it. New York was full of strange people, full of strange moments. Maybe that was all it had been. That was what I told myself as I stood in front of my classroom arranging paint supplies before the students arrived. The smell of acrylic paint and fresh paper usually calmed me. Not that morning. Around 10:30, my phone vibrated. A text from Adrian. "Good morning. Do not forget to eat lunch today." I smiled despite myself. That was classic Adrian. No heart emojis. No dramatic declarations. Just quiet concern. I typed back a promise and slipped my phone into my desk drawer. The day passed normally until dismissal. As I stepped outside the school building, a black sedan sat parked across the street. At first, I barely noticed it. Manhattan was full of black cars. But when I walked 3 blocks toward my apartment, the sedan remained behind me. Not close enough to feel threatening. Just there. By the time I reached the corner coffee shop where I usually graded papers, it was gone. I laughed at myself. Paranoia. That was all. Yet when Adrian arrived later that evening, I mentioned it anyway. His reaction lasted less than a second. a brief tightening around his eyes, a subtle stillness in his posture. Then it vanished. Probably nothing, he said. Probably. You do not sound convinced. New York is full of security companies, drivers, deliveries. People notice patterns where none exist. It was a reasonable explanation. Maybe too reasonable. We were sitting near the window of a small Italian restaurant downtown when another odd thing happened. A waiter approached our table carrying menus. The moment he recognized Adrian, his expression changed completely. Not excitement. Not recognition like seeing a celebrity. Something closer to nervous respect. His shoulders straightened. His voice became more careful. Good evening, sir. Sir. Not unusual by itself. Except the waiter could not have been older than 30. And Adrian was only 34. The interaction lasted seconds before normal conversation resumed, but I noticed. I was beginning to notice everything. Later, while Adrian paid the bill, he stepped away to answer a phone call. I was not trying to eavesdrop. I really was not. But the restaurant had become quiet, and his voice carried farther than he probably intended. No, he said calmly. Not tonight. A pause. Handle it tomorrow. Another pause. Then something that made my stomach tighten. The boss has already made his decision. I froze. The boss. The exact phrase I had heard before in movies. In crime documentaries. In stories about powerful men operating behind closed doors. Adrian returned moments later as though nothing had happened. Everything okay? I asked. Just work. There it was again. Work. The answer to every mystery. The explanation that explained nothing. That night, after he dropped me off at my apartment, I stood by my window watching his car disappear into the city. Then I opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for nearly a minute. Finally, I typed 2 simple words into the search bar. Adrian Moretti. I expected almost nothing to appear. Maybe a company website. A few business articles. A professional biography. That was the version of Adrian I knew. Successful investor. Private businessman. Occasionally mysterious boyfriend. Instead, the search results made my pulse quicken. There were dozens of articles mentioning his name. Interviews. Charity events. Financial publications. Photographs of Adrian standing beside politicians, business leaders, and people whose faces I recognized from national news. None of that was alarming. If anything, it confirmed what I already knew. He was wealthy, influential, connected. But then I noticed something strange. Every article felt incomplete, carefully polished, like someone had sanded away all the rough edges. There was almost nothing personal. No family history, no childhood stories, no college interviews, no social media accounts, no candid photographs. It was as if Adrian had appeared fully formed one day and simply stepped into the public eye. I kept scrolling. Midnight came and went. Rain tapped softly against the window while the glow of my laptop illuminated the dark apartment. Then I found a discussion forum. Most of it looked ridiculous. Anonymous comments. Wild theories. Rumors. The internet was full of them. I should have closed the page immediately. Instead, I kept reading. One comment mentioned Adrian attending a charity gala where several prominent figures had treated him with unusual deference. Another claimed that powerful people seemed nervous around him. A third simply called him untouchable. Untouchable. The word lingered in my mind. I rubbed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. This was insane. People invented stories about wealthy men all the time. Yet something about the last few days would not let me dismiss it completely. The frightened stranger. The black sedan. The waiter. The phone call. The boss. My phone suddenly buzzed, making me jump. Adrian. I stared at his name on the screen before answering. Hey, I said, trying to sound normal. You are awake late. His voice was calm and familiar. Comforting. Could not sleep. Everything okay? I looked at the search results still glowing on my screen. Yes. The lie came easier than expected. Just grading papers. Emma. There was something in the way he said my name. Something gentle. Do not work too hard. I smiled despite everything. That was the problem. No matter what strange things I discovered, Adrian still sounded like Adrian. The same man who remembered my favorite bakery. The same man who called just to make sure I got home safely. We talked for another 10 minutes before ending the call. Afterward, I closed the laptop and prepared for bed. But curiosity had already taken hold. The next afternoon, during my lunch break, I visited the public library near Bryant Park. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Yet 30 minutes later, I was sitting in front of an archive database, searching his name again. Most results were ordinary, until one article stopped me cold. It was 5 years old. A brief business report covering a charity fundraiser. There was a photograph attached. Adrian stood near the center of the image wearing a dark suit. Several men surrounded him. Their faces were serious, focused, respectful. Beneath the photograph was a short caption. I read it once, then twice, then a third time because I could not believe what I was seeing. One of the men beside Adrian was identified as the head of a federal organized crime task force, and he was looking directly at Adrian. The article stayed open on my screen long after the library announced its closing warning. I stared at the photograph until the faces blurred together. Nothing in the image proved anything. A businessman standing near a federal official was hardly a crime. Yet the feeling in my chest refused to go away. It was the look on Adrian's face. Calm, controlled, almost unreadable. The same expression I had seen for a split second when he stood by my apartment window watching the city below. The same expression that appeared whenever work called. By the time I stepped outside, the sky had already darkened. A cold wind swept through Bryant Park, carrying the scent of rain and traffic. I pulled my coat tighter and started toward the subway. My phone buzzed before I reached the station. Adrian. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. Hey, you sound tired, he said immediately. Long day. School. Something like that. There was a brief silence. Dinner tomorrow? Normally, I would have agreed without hesitation. This time I found myself studying every word. Every pause. Sure. Good. His voice softened slightly. I miss you. The simple honesty of it caught me off guard. Suddenly, I hated myself for investigating him behind his back. Maybe I was building monsters out of shadows. Maybe all of this was nothing more than coincidence and paranoia. We said goodnight and ended the call. The next evening, Adrian picked me up after work. The restaurant he chose sat on the 42nd floor of a luxury hotel overlooking the Hudson River. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city in gold and silver light. Everything felt elegant, expensive, effortless. Adrian looked completely at home there. That realization bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Halfway through dinner, he excused himself to take another phone call. I watched him walk toward a private hallway near the elevators. The moment he disappeared around the corner, curiosity got the better of me. I stood and headed toward the restroom. At least that was the excuse I gave myself. As I approached the hallway, voices drifted toward me. Low, professional. I slowed my steps. 2 men in dark suits stood near a side entrance. One was speaking quietly. The shipment arrived this afternoon. The other nodded. Does the boss know? He approved it personally. My stomach tightened. There was that word again. Boss. Before I could move, the door opened. Adrian stepped into the hallway. Both men immediately straightened. Their conversation stopped. One of them lowered his gaze. Neither spoke until Adrian gave a slight nod. Then they walked away without another word. Adrian turned and saw me standing there. For one terrifying second, neither of us moved. His expression did not change, but something passed through his eyes. Surprise, calculation, concern. Emma, he asked gently. Everything okay? I forced a smile. I was looking for the restroom. He studied me for a moment that felt much longer. Then he offered his hand. Come on. I will show you. I slipped my fingers into his. Warm, familiar, safe. Yet as we walked back toward the dining room, one thought echoed louder than ever before. Every strange clue, every uneasy feeling, every unanswered question seemed to point toward the same impossible conclusion. And for the first time, I was no longer sure I wanted the truth. I spent the next 2 days trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. I buried myself in lesson plans, graded assignments, cleaned my apartment twice. Anything to avoid thinking about Adrian. Anything to avoid asking the question that had been growing louder inside my head. But the question would not leave. Every strange detail connected to another. Every explanation created 2 more mysteries. By Friday evening, I knew I could not keep pretending. The uncertainty was worse than the truth. Adrian invited me to dinner at his penthouse overlooking Central Park. It was the first time he had ever brought me there. That fact alone made my pulse race. The elevator opened directly into the apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the living room. The city glittered below like a sea of stars. Everything was elegant, quiet, carefully designed. Yet despite the luxury surrounding us, the space felt strangely empty. There were no family photographs, No childhood memories displayed on shelves. No evidence of a life before success. Adrian greeted me with his usual warm smile, but I noticed the tension immediately. He knew something was wrong. He always knew. We sat across from each other at a dining table large enough for 10 people. Neither of us touched the food. Finally, he set down his glass and looked directly at me. What happened, Emma? His voice was calm, gentle. You have been distant all week. I stared at him. At the man I had fallen in love with over 8 months. The man who brought me blueberry muffins. The man who remembered every important date in my life. The man who somehow felt both familiar and impossible to understand. Who are you? The question escaped before I could soften it. Adrian did not react immediately. What do you mean? I mean I do not know anything anymore. The words came faster now. I keep finding things that do not make sense. People are afraid of you. Men call you boss. There are always people around you watching everything. Every time I ask about work, you change the subject. Silence filled the room. The city lights reflected in the glass behind him. For the first time since I had met him, Adrian looked tired. Not physically tired. Emotionally tired. Like someone carrying a weight for far too long. Emma. He spoke my name quietly. I never wanted you involved in any of this. My heart dropped. Not denial. Not confusion. Not surprise. Involved in what? Another silence. Longer this time. He stood and walked toward the window. His hands slipped into his pockets as he stared out across Manhattan. You once asked me why I never brought you here. I said nothing. The answer is because I knew this day would come. Slowly, he turned back toward me. The warmth was still there in his eyes. But now there was something else. Something guarded. Something I had glimpsed only in passing before. Everything between us was real, he said. Every dinner. Every conversation. Every moment. My chest tightened. That is not what I asked. Adrian nodded once. Then he took a slow breath. You are right. The room suddenly felt smaller. The air heavier. Then tell me the truth. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Finally, Adrian looked directly into my eyes and spoke the words I had been dreading all week. The truth is that the man you thought you knew is only part of who I am. For a moment, I could not speak. The city stretched behind Adrian in endless ribbons of light, but all I could focus on was the expression on his face. He was not angry. He was not defensive. Somehow that made everything harder. Then who are you? I asked quietly. Adrian looked down before meeting my eyes again. I run businesses, investments, real estate, logistics. That is the answer you always give. Because it is true, but it is not the whole truth. His jaw tightened slightly. No, the single word settled over the room like a storm cloud. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. The men who call you boss, I said. Who are they? Adrian remained silent for several seconds. People who work for me. Doing what? Another silence. I was beginning to hate those silences. Each one felt like a door closing somewhere between us. Things that are complicated, he finally answered. I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Complicated. Emma, do you know how crazy this sounds? I stood from my chair and stepped away from the table. For 8 months I thought I knew you. I thought you trusted me. I do trust you. Then why am I finding out pieces of your life from strangers? His eyes closed briefly. The reaction looked almost painful. Because I wanted one place where I did not have to be that person. The words stopped me. Not because they answered anything. Because they sounded honest. What person? I asked. Adrian walked toward the window again. Rain had started falling outside, tiny droplets streaking across the glass. The person people expect me to be. People are afraid of you. He nodded. Some are. Why? His reflection stared back from the darkened glass. Because fear is useful. The answer sent a chill through me. Not because of what he said. Because of how calmly he said it. Like someone discussing the weather. Like someone who had accepted a reality long ago. Are you dangerous? The question escaped before I could stop it. Adrian turned immediately. To you? To anyone? His gaze locked onto mine. I have spent 8 months making sure nothing ever happened to you. That was not an answer. Yet somehow it felt like one. My stomach tightened. Suddenly dozens of memories returned. The black sedan outside my school. The feeling of being watched. The strange timing of certain events. The way problems seemed to disappear before they ever reached me. Have people been following me? I asked. Adrian said nothing. The silence confirmed everything. Oh my God, Emma, you had people watching me? Protecting you? Without telling me. Because if I told you, you would have refused. I wanted to argue. The problem was that he was probably right. The realization only made me more upset. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. I need to go. Adrian took a step forward before stopping himself. Emma. His voice softened. Please. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I loved was standing right in front of me. Yet suddenly he felt like a stranger wearing Adrian's face. I do not know who you are anymore, I whispered. The hurt that crossed his expression lasted only a second. But I saw it. And somehow that hurt more than everything else. I walked toward the elevator. Just before the doors closed, I glanced back one last time. Adrian had not moved. He stood alone beside the window, watching the rain fall over Manhattan. And for the first time since I met him, he looked completely helpless. The next morning, Manhattan felt colder than usual. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was the empty space Adrian had left behind. I went through the motions of my day like someone moving underwater. I taught classes, answered emails, smiled when students showed me their paintings. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the penthouse. Back to the look in Adrian's eyes when I walked away. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered above the city. Rain began falling just as I left the school building. I pulled my coat tighter and headed toward the subway. Halfway down the block, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it. Instead, I answered. Hello. Silence. Then a man's voice. Calm. Professional. Ms. Parker. I stopped walking. Who is this? Someone who believes you should know the truth. My stomach tightened immediately. What truth? About Adrian Moretti. Hearing his full name from a stranger sent a chill through me. I'm not interested. You should be. The voice remained calm, especially if you think walking away from him means you are no longer involved. The call ended before I could respond. I stared at the screen. The number was already unavailable. For several seconds, I stood frozen beneath the rain. Then I shook it off and continued home. But the uneasy feeling stayed with me. That evening, I noticed something else. The black sedan was back, parked across the street from my apartment building. Not moving, not hiding, just waiting. I watched from my living room window as headlights reflected across wet pavement. An hour later, it was still there. 2 hours later, it remained. Around 10 o'clock, another message arrived, this time by text. One sentence. Look outside. My heart immediately began racing. I stepped cautiously toward the window. Across the street, the sedan's headlights flashed once, then twice. Nothing else happened. No threats, no demands, just the strange certainty that someone wanted me to know they were there. I closed the curtains and backed away. Sleep never came. The next day was worse. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. At the grocery store, at the coffee shop, walking home from work. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was not. By Friday afternoon, I finally reached my breaking point. I needed answers. Real answers. I left school early and headed toward the public library again. If someone wanted me to know the truth, I would find it myself. Rain hammered against the windows as I sat before another archive database. Hours passed. Articles, business records, charity foundations, corporate reports. Most of it revealed nothing. Then I discovered a photograph I had never seen before. It showed Adrian leaving a private event several years earlier. Standing beside him were 3 men in dark suits. Beneath the image was a caption identifying one of them as a longtime associate of the Moretti organization. Organization. Not company. Not corporation. Organization. My pulse quickened. Then I noticed a second file attached to the article. A scanned letter. The first line made my blood run cold. It read, anyone connected to Adrian Moretti becomes valuable. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. The people watching me were not interested in who I was. They were interested in who I meant to him. The realization followed me. Everywhere. Through crowded sidewalks. Through sleepless nights. Through every attempt to return to my normal life. I had spent days trying to distance myself from Adrian, yet somehow his shadow remained. Not because he was forcing his way back into my life. He never called. Never showed up unexpectedly. Never sent messages asking for another chance. The silence itself felt strange. Almost respectful. As though he had accepted my decision, even if it hurt him. Then Saturday arrived. I left my apartment just after noon, hoping a long walk would clear my head. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city washed clean beneath a pale gray sky. People filled the sidewalks. Couples carrying shopping bags. Tourists taking photographs. Street musicians performing beneath awnings. For the first time all week, I began to relax. Then I noticed the man. He stood across the street pretending to read a newspaper. When our eyes met, he immediately looked away. My stomach tightened. 2 blocks later, another unfamiliar face appeared behind me. Then another. Maybe they were strangers. Maybe they were not. By the time I reached Bryant Park, my pulse was racing. I pulled out my phone and considered calling someone. But who? The answer came before I could stop it. Adrian. I stared at his name for several seconds. Then I put the phone away. No, I could handle this myself. I kept walking. 10 minutes later, the feeling returned. That sensation of being observed, measured, followed. The city suddenly felt much larger and much lonelier than usual. My phone vibrated unexpectedly. One message. No greeting. No explanation. Just 3 words. Go inside now. My heart nearly stopped. The sender was Adrian. I spun around instinctively. Across the street, a black SUV sat parked near the curb. Dark windows. Engine running. I could not see inside. Another message arrived immediately. Do not panic. Enter the nearest building. Every instinct told me to ignore him. Every emotion told me I should still be angry. Yet something deeper responded first. Trust. Without thinking, I crossed the street and entered a crowded bookstore. Warm air wrapped around me. The scent of paper and coffee replaced the cold city breeze. My hands trembled as I moved toward the back of the store. Seconds later, my phone rang. Adrian. I answered immediately. What is happening? His voice was calm, controlled. Yet beneath it I heard concern. Real concern. Are you inside? Yes. Stay there. Adrian. Please. The word surprised me. Not because of what he said, because of how he said it. There was no authority in his voice. No command. Just worry. Pure and unmistakable. You knew this would happen, I whispered. Silence. Then a quiet answer. I knew it was possible. Suddenly dozens of memories clicked into place. The sedan. The strange phone calls. The people watching from a distance. The protection I never asked for and never noticed. All this time, I said softly. You were trying to keep me safe. Another silence. Then, yes. I closed my eyes. For the first time, I stopped seeing the rumors, the headlines, the secrets. Instead, I saw the man who remembered my favorite bakery. The man who checked whether I had eaten lunch. The man who spent 8 months protecting me without asking for credit. And standing in that bookstore, surrounded by strangers, I realized something that terrified me even more than the truth. Despite everything I had learned, despite every reason I had to walk away, part of me still trusted him completely. 2 days later, the rain returned. Soft at first, then steady enough to blur the city lights beyond my apartment window. I stood there with a mug of coffee growing cold in my hands, staring at a skyline that suddenly looked different. Not because the city had changed, because I had. For weeks, I had been chasing the truth about Adrian, digging through articles, following clues, looking for reasons to stop loving him. And somehow every answer had led me back to the same place. Back to him. My phone rested on the kitchen counter. Silent. He had not called since the bookstore. He had respected the distance I asked for. Respected it even when it clearly hurt him. That realization lingered in my mind more than anything else. A man obsessed with control would have demanded explanations. He would have forced his way back into my life. Adrian had done neither. Around 7 o'clock, I made a decision. Before I could overthink it, I grabbed my coat, my keys, and headed into the storm. Manhattan glowed beneath reflections of red brake lights and neon signs. The familiar rush of traffic filled the evening air. 40 minutes later, I stood across the street from Adrian's building. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. For several seconds, I simply stared upward. Then I crossed the street and entered the lobby. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors finally opened, I found him exactly where I had left him days ago, standing near the massive windows overlooking Central Park. The city stretched behind him like a galaxy of lights. He turned at the sound of the elevator. Surprise flashed across his face. Real surprise. Neither of us spoke immediately. The silence felt strangely peaceful. Emma, he finally said. Just my name. Nothing else. I stepped closer. I have spent weeks trying to figure out who you are. Adrian remained still, waiting. I read articles, looked through records, listened to rumors. I laughed softly. Turns out everyone seems to have an opinion about you. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The first one I had seen in days. And what did you decide? He asked quietly. I looked at him. Not the stories. Not the reputation. Not the mystery. Just the man standing in front of me. I decided that the person who brought me soup when I was sick was real. His expression softened. The person who remembered my students' names was real. He said nothing. The person who spent months protecting me without asking for anything in return was real. For a moment, emotion flickered across his face before disappearing again. Adrian took a slow breath. Emma, there are things about my life that are complicated. I know. Things that may never completely make sense. I know that too. The city lights reflected in his eyes as he looked at me. Then why are you here? I smiled through the tears threatening to form. Because after everything, the answer had become surprisingly simple. Because now I know who you are. The room fell silent. Then I took another step forward. And I am still here. Outside, rain continued to fall across Manhattan. But for the first time in weeks, neither of us seemed afraid of what tomorrow might bring.